is an incredibly personal and humiliating attack. It's literally, blowing out the groins of Hezbollah fighters. Hezbollah has to not only show Israel that it's a proper fighting force, it has to show its own supporters, its own members, that it has that it is not that it's an organization worth following.
Now, Israel says it hit 100 Hezbollah rocket sites in Lebanon overnight, and there's serious concerns of an escalation of violence in the Middle East. Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah says the deadly pager and walkie-talkie explosions in Beirut, which Israel has not claimed responsibility for, had crossed all red lines and would be received as a declaration of war. Nadine Majzoub is a Lebanese journalist and says the country is still reeling from the explosions. We'll get a US perspective on this story in a moment, but first let's speak to Richard Spencer, who has covered the Middle East for The Times extensively. Morning, Richard.
Good morning.
Bring us up to date on these attacks overnight. We obviously had the statement yesterday evening by Hassan Nasrallah and then the response by Israel.
Yeah, again, it's always very hard when these things are happening to judge what their purpose is. That's not the point of carrying out these operations in war, but these do seem to be specifically timed to Nasrallah's speech. Just as Nasrallah's speech was about to begin yesterday, jets started flying very low over Beirut. Remembering this is not a country that itself Israel is formally at war with. In theory, they're just targeting Hezbollah, and Beirut is the national capital. So that was a very intimidating experience for everyone in Beirut, but it was clearly aimed at saying to Nasrallah and Nasrallah's supporters, we are watching you. We are not letting up. We're not going to be intimidated by anything you have to say. And again, with these strikes on presumably Hezbollah targets in the south of Lebanon, actual physical strikes, very intense strikes. This is a message to say to Hezbollah, we're up for a fight if you decide to retaliate for these pager attacks aggressively.
You've written a very thoughtful piece in the comment section of The Times today about on one hand, the chances of a ground invasion by Israel into Lebanon, and indeed things that you've been told.
Yeah, so this has actually been a debate that's been going on in the Israeli upper echelons of its both its political and military leadership pretty much since the war on Gaza started at the end of last year. The question always is with Israel is do you have a war on one front or many fronts, because it has enemies on all sides. Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon. The Syrian regime is hostile, and is also, Syria itself is home to militias, including Hezbollah, but other Iran-backed militias that can and do target Israel. The question is, do you try and sort out all these issues all at once, or do you take them on one by one, but have this continual threat from all sides? With Hezbollah joining in the attacks after October the 7th, a lot of Israeli generals saying, why don't we just go in, clear Hezbollah out of the far south of Lebanon, close to the border area. Then we can move the Israeli citizens who've moved away from that area back. There are about 80,000 Israeli residents of the far north of Israel have become internal refugees, essentially moved elsewhere, leaving that area depopulated. And Israel wants to get them back for their own sakes, but also for symbolic reasons. Now, whether they do or not is still the big question. I think there's division still. There was when I was up on the border a few months ago. I was talking to generals and ordinary soldiers and ordinary residents of that area, and the soldiers said, "Let's go, let's go, let's go." Of course, that's what troops do. The generals appear to be divided on the subject. So at the moment, I think they're holding off. I think they're still holding off. There was a suggestion that this Pages attack was a kind of precursor to a ground invasion, and in the piece I suggest it was actually an alternative to that. It was a way of getting at Hezbollah, showing Hezbollah what Israel can do without actually needing to take the massive risk of a ground invasion, as we've seen in Gaza. This is a process that is not only very bloody but also brings a lot of criticism for Israel from around the world.
And Richard, we've spoken about lots on Times Radio about this is widely seen as an attack by Israel, by Mossad. Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, saying that red lines have been crossed. They see this as a declaration of war. We've heard this kind of language before, but with your experience, what's your assessment of how serious a situation we're in right now?
I think it's a very serious situation for Hezbollah. As I was saying to one of your colleagues the other day, this is a very, very unusual attack on Hezbollah. All the militias and enemies of Israel around the region are used to being bombed. They're used to suffering civilian casualties. They're used to fighting, often, sometimes not Israel, each other in some cases. In the Syrian civil war, for example, on the ground. This mass targeted attack on the physical bodies of Hezbollah operatives as they were doing their shopping, as they were sitting in their sitting rooms or watching television or whatever. Is an incredibly personal and humiliating attack. It's literally blowing out the groins of Hezbollah fighters. Hezbollah has to not only show Israel that it's a proper fighting force, it has to show its own supporters, its own members, that it has that it is not that it's an organization worth following. I mean, this is a very humiliating act for many, many thousands of Hezbollah members. So I think it is a dangerous moment, but possibly not for the reasons we think it is. I don't think this just means more escalation, more will there be a ground war or so? I think Hezbollah now have to rethink their strategy, and that could be, in fact, more dangerous in the long run for Israel and perhaps for the rest of the world. If they revert to what they did before, much more sort of terroristic type attacks, kidnapping, bombing buildings in third countries and so on, which Hezbollah has done in the past. They may feel that this is the way forward for them. I don't know. It's very hard to say. We don't know what the considerations of Hezbollah leadership is, but they must feel that their conventional strategies of building missiles and threatening Israel that way has not worked.
Richard, really good to get your assessment. Thank you so much. That is Richard Spencer. He covered the Middle East for the Times extensively. You can read his piece if you've got a digital subscription. Go online now. It's in the comments section of the Times.